Many challenges faced by those diagnosed with breast cancer. Julia Bradbury, Breast Cancer and Me is tonight at 9. Now on STV, Thursday's Lunchtime News.
The latest on the Tory MP accused of watching porn in the Commons. We still don't know who he is, but if found guilty, he could be thrown out of the party and Parliament.
Totally inappropriate, absolutely egregious behaviour and incredibly worrying.
Also ahead in court, a man accused of murdering the missing mother of two, Katie Kenyon. The future of TV, the government's plans to transform broadcasting. And stamps honouring the Spitfire women ahead of the 80th anniversary of VE Day.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hussain.
Good afternoon. Who is the Tory MP accused of watching pornography in the Commons? We still don't know, or what punishment he will face if the allegations are proved to be true. But government ministers have lined up today to condemn him, saying there's no place for pornography in any workplace. The MP could be suspended and thrown out of the Conservative Party, and the story has reignited criticism of the overall culture in Parliament. Here's our political correspondent, Daniel Hewitt.
It is where the laws of the land are made, the great issues debated, the big questions asked and occasionally answered. But the question for one MP right now is why was he instead watching pornography on his phone in the House of Commons chamber? And what is Parliament and his party going to do about it?
I think what I'm rather shocked is that someone would sit in the chamber or in a committee doing that. First and foremost, they're paid to do their job as an MP. Secondly, I think it is important that people, if they're offended, quite rightly make a complaint and then it is dealt with and disciplined.
If they turn out to be true, I mean, they should be sacked, shouldn't they? I mean, that's the absolute minimum.
They can certainly lose the party whip for that behaviour.
Do you think that should happen?
I certainly think if this case is proved, then they should lose the party whip.
The claims were made by two female Conservative MPs who both say they saw their male colleague watching porn on the green benches. One of them was sat next to him at the time. They've been told an independent investigation will be launched by Parliament if they decide to make a complaint.
Totally inappropriate, absolutely egregious behaviour and incredibly worrying.
This government minister said the incident should be properly investigated.
I think it's a minority of men in Parliament who are behaving like this. I think it's very good that we've got a robust and impartial grievance process that can address those instances where it does occur. And I very much hope we will stamp it out.
But this isn't the only MP accused, and it's not just the Conservative Party. This was Prime Minister's questions only yesterday.
56 members of this House are under investigation for sexual misconduct, and that includes 3 of his cabinet ministers.
Of course, sexual harassment is intolerable, and it's quite right that members should now have a procedure by which they can bring that to the attention of the House authorities.
2 Labour shadow ministers are also allegedly facing accusations of sexual harassment and misconduct. Their leader today said there is undoubtedly a culture of sexism in Parliament.
There are too many examples, too many women have experienced that same sexism and misogyny. We've all got a responsibility. That requires culture change, and culture change has to be led from and modelled from the top.
But many female MPs and staff that work in this building say that culture has persisted for years, with very little done about it.
Daniel, are we likely to find out who this MP is?
The honest answer is, Nina, we don't know. Now, if you speak to Tory MPs, they say if there is an investigation that happens here as a result of these accusations and that MP is found guilty, is found to have done this, then he should not only be named, he should be kicked out of the party, and then there could be consequences there for a potential by-election, and ultimately it's his constituents that will make the ultimate decision on this. I say if, because it requires witnesses, people to come forward to actually make this complaint to Parliament's independent body, the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme. That's a body that's been set up to deal exactly with these kind of incidents. Now, the government's chief whip has basically said they're looking into this, but they've urged those who've made these accusations to come forward to that body so they can independently investigate. Now, if they don't, then I was speaking to the Attorney General, Suella Braverman, you saw in my piece, there's very little they can do if people don't come forward to make these complaints officially. That said, because this isn't the first time we've had accusations of misconduct and sexual harassment and this kind of thing in Parliament, there is a kind of culture of mistrust. Not all MPs want to come forward and officially make complaints like this. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, the answer is we may not find out. We may find out if this investigation goes ahead.
Thanks for trying anyway. And it's not just the Tories that are in trouble today.
No, Labour MP Liam Byrne, former Labour minister, has been found guilty by that same body, the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme, of bullying a former member of staff. And the punishment for him is that he's been suspended from the House of Commons for 2 days. The Parliamentary Standards Commissioner said his behaviour was a significant misuse of power. Mr Byrne has apologised for this. Labour says it stands by this decision. Mr Byrne said he's profoundly sorry, but a 2-day suspension for Liam Byrne.
Daniel Hewitt, thank you very much. Well, we'll stay with politics now because the Conservative MP for Bridgend, Jamie Wallace, has been charged with failing to stop after a car crash in November last year. South Wales Police said the 37-year-old had also been charged with failure to report a road traffic collision, driving without due care and attention, and leaving a vehicle in a dangerous position following the crash near Cowbridge. Police in London have charged a 28-year-old man with the murders of 4 people killed in a house in Southwark. The victims were from 3 generations of the same family. They were grandmother Dolit Hill and her partner Denton Burke, Dolit's daughter Tanisha Afori Akufo and Tanisha's daughter Samantha Drummonds. Joshua Jack appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning. Our correspondent Neil Connery is there. Neil, take us through what happened earlier.
Well, the proceedings here in the last hour were brief, lasting around 5 minutes or so. Joshua Jack appearing before Westminster Magistrates Court wearing a grey tracksuit. He confirmed his address in South East London and his age of 28. He was charged with murdering 4 members of a family at a house in South East London in the early hours of Monday. Now, he entered no plea at this stage and was remanded in custody to the Old Bailey on May the 3rd for the next hearing. Now, there were family members of the victims in court, and one of them was in tears during these proceedings this morning. At the property where the incident took place in Bermondsey, tributes continue to be laid in memory of the 4 victims. The community there still in a deep sense of shock at the loss of life, and a real determination there to show its support to all those affected.
Neil Connery, thank you. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres today visited areas around Kyiv before meeting the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He was shown the damage caused outside the capital in some places that have seen some of the most horrific attacks since the invasion began. Our correspondent Rebecca Barry joins us from Lviv in western Ukraine. Tell us more about today's visit, Rebecca.
Yeah, well, today the UN chief came here to Ukraine to see for himself the impact of this war. Earlier this week, he was in Moscow to meet President Putin, and that angered many here in Ukraine who say he should have come here first. He visited an area near the capital, Kiev, which was previously occupied by Russian forces. As he looked at the burnt-out buildings, he described it as a horrendous sight. He said he could imagine his own family living in those destroyed houses. He could imagine his own grandchildren running away in panic. He described the war as an absurdity in the 21st century and insisted that the UN will continue its work, providing humanitarian support and trying to secure the evacuation of civilians from places like Mariupol. Later, he'll meet President Zelensky, who will, no doubt, as he has in the past, urge the UN to do more to fulfill its role of providing international peace and security. It comes as Russia has warned the West that providing heavy weapons to Ukraine is dangerous for Europe, in response, no doubt, to that speech last night by the UK Foreign Secretary urging the West to ramp up its military support for Ukraine. Earlier this week, when the UN Security General visited Moscow, he described himself as a messenger of peace. But 2 months into this conflict, many here in Ukraine will say that messenger has arrived too late.
Rebecca Barry, thank you. Still to come, jailed for 20 years, the drug addict mother convicted of the manslaughter of her 7-year-old son. And the pioneering women honoured with their own stamps. First, a 50-year-old man has appeared in court accused of murdering a missing mother of 2 from Burnley. Katie Kenyon hasn't been seen since Friday morning. Police are continuing to search a nearby forest. Andrew Burfield appeared at Blackburn Magistrates Court. Our North of England reporter Yasmin Bodleby is there. What happened in court?
Well, Nina, Andrew Burfield made a brief appearance here at Blackburn Magistrates Court earlier, wearing a grey tracksuit and flanked by 3 officers. The 50-year-old spoke only to confirm his name and age and that he lives on Todmorden Road in Burnley. He has been charged with the murder of 33-year-old Katie Kenyon. Now, the mum of 2 has been missing since last Friday. And this week there has been a huge search operation in and around Gisborne Forest in the Ribble Valley here in Lancashire. More than 60 specialist officers from 4 forces have been scouring a vast and difficult, dense wooded area. Mountain rescue teams, fire and rescue, sniffer dogs, drones in the sky, police officers on horseback have all been drafted in to help try to find her, but there have been no sightings of Katie Kenyon. Now today, Andrew Burfield made no indication as to how he will plead. He has been taken away from Blackburn Magistrates Court now. He's been remanded into custody and he will appear at Preston Crown Court tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, the search for Katie Kenyon continues.
Yasmin Bodleby, thank you. The supermarket Sainsbury's has warned its profits this year will be hit by soaring inflation and a fall in customers' disposable incomes. Sainsbury's says its customers are starting to watch every penny because of the cost of living crisis, and it is trying to limit price increases despite facing higher costs from suppliers. And Barclays has become the latest UK bank to warn about the impact of the cost of living crisis, saying that its customers were already facing harder conditions because of surging inflation. The bank has put aside more than £140 million to cover the costs of any customers who fail to pay back loans. Barclays' concerns over inflation echo those raised earlier this week by other banks, including Lloyds and HSBC. Streaming services are set to be held to account by the broadcasting regulator Ofcom under new government proposals. Netflix and Amazon Prime and others will be brought into line with other broadcasters for the first time, but crucially, not YouTube. The government also confirmed Channel 4 will be sold off. Martin Stew is with me. Martin, first of all, why the changes?
Well, Nina, the way we watch programmes completely changed, doesn't it? You've got your phone, you've got your tablets and you're streaming things, you're on catch-up. And the government says that rules and regulations just haven't kept pace. So they want to do 2 things they've announced today. First is that they do want to go ahead with that sale of Channel 4. And secondly, they want to level the playing field between the more traditional companies like ITV and BBC and those streaming services you mentioned, which have taken so many of the viewers. Now, let's start with that first one. The sale of Channel 4 News has been completely controversial. It's currently publicly owned, and critics say that it'll potentially stifle creativity and is an act of, I quote, cultural vandalism. But today the government said they're adamant it's the right thing to do.
Channel 4 is successful, but it's not a government's business to run a television channel. The government has put some things in place that'll be good for it. You know, Channel 4 will be able to commission or actually produce its own work, not just commission from other people productions. It'll allow it to raise funds in a way that it can't do when it's a nationalised organisation. It will be allowed to compete and produce some good, further good programming.
All right, what about the other changes? What will they mean for viewers?
Well, unlike streaming services, at the moment, traditional TV channels like ITV and BBC have to provide a certain amount of public service broadcasting, your news, your documentaries, arts features, that sort of thing. And some of that may change. Now, the good news for the two of us is that news will continue. And the good news people watching who are sports fans is that a lot of those crown jewels will stay on free-to-air TV. So that includes the Football World Cup, the Rugby World Cup, the Olympics, and moving on, the Grand National, the FA Cup final, and Wimbledon. So they're going to stay on free-to-air TV. That's the good news. The not-so-good news is if you're a fan of religious programming or regional programming, things could change. So under the new rules, the BBC may not have to keep programmes like Songs of Praise on prime time on BBC One, and also programmes that are made in the UK but outside of London. There won't have to necessarily be as many of those. Now, the final point sounds a bit dull, but it's really important, and that is regulation. If I was to make up a spurious nonsense claim like putting a grape in your ear will stop you getting gout, and it was unchallenged, ITV could be fined hundreds of thousands of pounds. At the moment, if you said something like that on Netflix or Amazon or one of the other services, they wouldn't be fined. But the plan is to bring them under Ofcom rules, so they would be subject to the same regulations. There's a but here, though, because there's one name missing from that. When you turn on your smart TV, what do you see alongside those things? YouTube, the thing all our kids are watching, and where critics say a lot of misinformation is spread. At the moment, the government say YouTube doesn't count as a video on-demand service, and as a result, won't come under this regulation, but will come under the regulation of the Online Harms Bill, and people will be worried that maybe people won't be protected in the full way.
Martin Stew, thank you very much. Thank you. The American actor and filmmaker Olivia Wilde was handed custody papers while she was on stage promoting her new film. Wilde was in Las Vegas when she was given a yellow envelope marked private and confidential. The director split with her former partner, the Ted Lasso star and creator Jason Sudeikis. In 2020, the pair have 2 children. It's reported he didn't know she'd be served in such a public way. Here, a drug addict whose young son died alone from a needless asthma attack has been jailed for 20 years. Laura Heath admitted child cruelty and was convicted of gross negligence manslaughter last week. Hakeem Hussain was found dead in a garden in Birmingham. He was 7. Ben Chapman is at Coventry Crown Court. Ben, what did the judge say about Laura Heath?
Well, he described the death of this little boy, Hakeem Hussain, as needless, tragic, and the result of the abject failure of his mother, whose parenting he described as deplorable and catastrophic. He said that in Hakeem's short life, he'd been an inspiration of happiness and affection for those who knew him, but he died alone in the cold, gasping for air following an asthma attack in 2017. His mother, Laura Heath, was a drug addict who prioritised her addiction over her son's health. She even turned the inhaler for his severe asthma into a makeshift crack pipe, and they lived in squalor. The night Hakeem died, she'd passed out after smoking drugs, and so when he woke up struggling to breathe, there was no one to help him. Now, in his last few months, the court was told he'd pleaded with his mother to stop using drugs, and today, sentencing Laura Heath to 20 years, the judge told her that she should have taken her son's advice. Now, there are also difficult questions for the agencies in Birmingham who were involved in Hakeem's life. There were several referrals from his school to Children's Services, and at a child protection conference just 2 days before he died, a school nurse had warned that he might die within days, and yet no immediate action was taken. Now, there is a different agency running Children's Services in Birmingham today. Its chief executive says a case like Hakeem's would be handled differently now. But as his mother begins her long prison sentence, a review will be published in the next few weeks into what went so tragically wrong in this little boy's life.
Ben Chapman, thank you. Ben Stokes has been named England Test captain, taking over from Joe Root. Stokes' first test as permanent England captain will be against world champions New Zealand at Lord's in June. He previously captained England in the first test defeat by the West Indies in 2020 when Root missed the match to attend the birth of his second child. The first gender-balanced NASA crew has arrived at the International Space Station after being launched by Elon Musk's company SpaceX. The 4 astronauts arrived at the space station 16 hours after liftoff from Kennedy Space Center yesterday. The crew includes Jessica Watkins, the first black woman to work at the International Space Station. SpaceX has now launched 5 crews for NASA and 2 private crews in just under 2 years. Finally, this lunchtime, the new stamps being released to honour the work of women in World War II. From the Spitfire pilots to the code breakers at Bletchley, the 10 stamps will be released to mark the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day next month. Charlie Frost has more.
They helped the Allies soar to victory in the skies, whilst blazing the trail for women's rights and equal pay. These are the behind-the-scenes heroines of World War II, who are now centre stage on a new set of stamps. One, a rare photo taken at Bletchley Park, where women did top-secret work to outsmart the enemy.
Women played an enormous role at Bletchley Park. They were really fundamental to the organisation, and that's reflected in the fact that by January 1945, over 75% of the workforce was female. Just the sheer number of women who were employed meant that the organisation couldn't have functioned without them.
Others celebrated the Spitfire women who delivered bomber and fighter planes from factory to military airfield, amongst them pilot Diana Walker, seen here speaking in 1980.
Well, Spitfires were the most lovely airplanes. Anybody will tell you who's flown them. They were part of you when you got into them. They were an aircraft strapped to you. When you moved, it seemed to move. It was very manoeuvrable. They were lovely things to fly, beautiful things to fly.
In 1944, Diana became the first British woman to fly a Spitfire in Europe, delivering 260 of them to RAF airfields during the war.
These are Spitfires in the making.
From sky to land, women did a huge range of vital work during the conflict, illustrated in this set of 10 stamps, all personally approved by the Queen. She herself part of the war effort, joining the Territorial Service at 18. Royal Mail will release the stamps next week to commemorate VE Day, almost 80 years since the war was won, a tribute to the brilliance and bravery of Britain's women. Charlie Frost, ITV News.
Mary's here at 6:30 from me. Bye-bye.